want to welcome Senator Eli Bebout, Representative Dan Kirkbride, and Senator Michael von Flatern. Folks, you're looking at three individuals that want to spend time with us today that have almost 5 decades of service, a public service, just in the House and the Senate. And if we start with Senator Bebout, he has 13 years in each chamber, and he started as a freshman in a minority party with the House. Took a gap there, but Senator von Flatern is from Campbell County, and Representative Kirkbride has the least experience, but some of the most valuable, with 7 years experience. These three gentlemen are all alumni. Eli broke ground for us with the class of 2001, and Michael and Dan followed. And we did, along with me, who had done it previous to running for the legislature. But I would say one of the things that all three of us, or all four of us, had in common was the trust that we gained through Leadership Wyoming and the love for Wyoming, having traveled the state with our classes. And so with that, I'd like to start with sharing a memory from your freshman year and in the legislature. And let's just start with Eli.
Well, thank you very much, Rosie. It's great to see you, as well as to be here with Michael and Dan. It was 1987, which was a long time ago, and I think my first memory of the legislature was just in awe of the entire process. The last time I'd been in our state capitol was when I was in high school at Boise State, and so I show up down there, and you just to be in that chamber with all those people that have the love for Wyoming that we do, and to step up and be willing to serve was just awesome and quite humbling, as a matter of fact. And what I did, and quite frankly, I did a lot of listening that first session. And I remember reading about Abraham Lincoln when he first went to the legislature. Not that I'm comparing myself to him, I'm not. But when he first went to the legislature in Illinois, he spent the entire year listening. And so what I did really was listen, and I would look at different people that brought different aspects, different talent, different backgrounds, and listen to be able to formulate an idea on how I would vote. There was always some interesting stories, and I guess a humorous one would be, it was during either the second year or the first of my second term when we were upstairs in those very small committee meeting rooms, and I was there with a fellow member of the legislature, and I walked out one summer and he said, "Well, where did you go?" And I said, "Well, I went to the restroom." He said, "You mean there's a restroom up here?" I said, "Yeah, it's right down the hall where that door says what it said." So there was a lot of people that run around that Capitol and that had a great love for it. And so my first remembrance would be just in awe of everybody that was willing to serve.
And how about you, Senator von Flatern? And if I can call you guys by your first names, because it's very uncomfortable for me to use your titles.
Please do. Thank you, Rosie. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Michael.
Learning where the bathrooms are is probably the toughest thing you have to do. The new Capitol is a little better. I will say the renovated Capitol looks a lot better. One of my first memories was, so they tell you to keep your head down when you show up down there, just listen, kind of formulate your year's worth of listening and keeping your head down and getting these ideas all set. But I'd already promised that I would go down there and get passing lanes on this one highway. So I went to the Transportation Committee, which I was on, and presented my bill to them, and they were all for it. Then they re-referred me to Appropriations. And I went to Appropriations, and Appropriations there, we have the chair there, so I'll be careful. But they tend to take the money out of the bills, and they stripped all the money out. And I thought I lost the bill right there. I mean, I didn't know enough about the process to understand that when they stripped the money out, you still had a chance to amend the money back in on the floor. So I went to a legislator that had been there quite a while. That was Jerry Geis. And I talked to him and he said, oh yeah, you know, we're still going to hear your bill. And I said, geez, you know, but they took all the money out of it. I just don't have a bill left. Oh, we'll hear it anyway. And he says, you need to amend that money back in. So I said, whatever. And so I got an amendment proposed that would put the money back in. And I presented my bill and I almost talked it to death, which is a habit of all new legislators. They talk and they talk. And I didn't need to talk that long, but I did anyway. And I can remember Senator Coe standing up and he said, how many miles of 2-lane road do we have in this state? Which was not a question I was ready for. I wasn't expecting that question. And I said, I'll get back to you. And so he let that go. But anyway, we got part of the money back into the bill, not all of it. And then the federal money, federal multi-lane highways came up and they said, you know, we take $4 million out of that. So we ended up with probably 11 or $12 million that went into making those passing lanes on this one highway. So that was my story, Rosie. I'm sticking to it too, by the way.
And you were successful too, Michael. So congratulations on that, Highway 59. Before we go to Dan, I think the other thing for all of you to know is that they're all currently chairman. Eli's chairman of appropriations, Michael's chairman of transportation and military, transportation, highway and military, and Dan is chairman of judiciary. So Dan, you've come a long way in 7 years.
I have two things I'll mention, Rosie. One is my first year was in 2013, which was the year of the great upset over what to do with the state superintendent of public instruction. So that was a real eye-opener to me about how partisan things could get and how hard feelings could emerge. And I finally figured out there was a way when you'd had lunch at noon, you could kind of take a circuitous route and get back at your desk without having walked through all the lobbyists and upset citizens out in the hall by the front door of the House chamber. And that was good to learn that early on. But I had been over at Superintendent Hill's office, and that ended up, the vote I made ended up being a very important vote for my future in my own county, because that was an important issue to folks. And the other thing I remember from that time was Governor Geringer, who had preceded me as a representative from Platte County, talked about his first time to the Capitol, and he thought that the place was such a sacred place that on his first day he came in the back door. He didn't think he was worthy of coming in the front door. I always thought that was a great statement. It stuck with me all this time.
Dan, what about your first leadership role, and how did you feel about it? How do you rate your performance?
You know, probably my first and only leadership role was being chairman of the House Judiciary Committee in 2016. Speaker Harshman appointed me. One of the great days of my adult life, really. And I loved doing that. I learned so much about the legal system and got to work with so many nice people. I was kind of a 98-pound weakling in that I'd never been on the committee. I was not an attorney. I was not an ex-sheriff or anything. But we still managed to do a lot of good. You didn't have to be have a law degree to know that if a woman was being strangled, that the laws needed to be tightened up to help those situations so that those kind of abuses didn't continue. So wonderful time, a privilege to get to do that. First with Leland Christensen was the Senate co-chairman, and then Tara Nethercott's been the Senate chairman the last 2 years.
Yeah. And how about you, Michael?
Well, I always considered myself a great leader, but you know, these short times that I didn't. You know, I was running a welding contracting business before I came to the Senate, and I just realized in the last few years that I never looked at the big picture. I never looked at growing that company in a way that it should be. So that was probably the biggest flop I've had of leadership, is not looking at the big picture.
Yeah, and you just recently are finishing up your term as the Council of State Governments chairmanship.
Chairman, yes, I will be. And so that we had our last meeting.
Oh, well, congratulations. But also, Michael was a trailblazer in doing the first virtual Council of State Governments conference because we couldn't have it in Jackson this year due to COVID. And how about you, Eli? You've had many different roles in leadership.
Well, I have, but before we get there, I wanted to not only congratulate Michael once again for CSG, but you as well, Rosie, because you were in one of those chairmanship roles for CSG, as I recall, a few years ago. So both of you did a great job of representing Wyoming at a national level. I can remember talking to different people about it and their respect for Wyoming, seeing the two of you and the quality you bring from the Wyoming Legislature to those leadership roles nationally. I actually was CSG West, but I think Rosie, yours might have been the national one. I can't remember which one, but it was good for our state.
Thank you.
Yeah, leadership is something that initially I really wasn't that interested in it. As a member of the minority party, I sort of got swung into a leadership position working with then Governor Sullivan on working on his bills, which was kind of fun to try to bring a bill from a Democratic governor in a Republican-controlled legislature and being in the minority party. So it was interesting and I enjoyed that. But then when I switched parties and went over to the Republican Party, I remember walking to our first caucus, and of course the caucus of the Republican Party are a lot different than the Democrats. And I remember walking in there, and a friend of mine, Les Brown, said, "Well, why don't you run for this position?" I believe it was a conference chairman. I said, "Well, I hadn't even given any thought, Les. I don't know." He said, "Why don't I nominate you? You give it a talk, and we'll see what happens." I said, "Well, sure." And so he did, and I ran against someone that I had so much respect for, which was Dorothy Perkins, and that kind of got it started. And from there, I remember it wasn't a couple of years later where then a good friend Bill Stafford walks up and says, "We'd like to have you run for the majority floor leader." And I just said, "You're crazy. Why would I want to do that?" And anyway, long term, I did. I ended up doing that and went on to be speaker. But one of the best things about the leadership, I think, getting away from the politics of the legislature, was being involved with the Business Alliance and the Heritage Society and Foundation. I was chairman of that, and we had a meeting, I believe, in Pinedale with Mick McMurray and Bill Schilling and other members of the executive committee and the Business Alliance. And it was a great meeting. We started talking about a thing called Leadership Wyoming. And that was one of the real highlights, to be able to not only figure out how to do it right. We went around, we went down to Colorado and looked at 50 for Colorado. We looked at some other things and some models we didn't like. And at the end of the day, with Bill was really a driver in that. We all know that. And with Bill's leadership and working together, we were able to put that to reality, and then come up with the first class, which, for all those you listening, Wendy was in that first class. I see her there. And we were the best class. Jeff was in that first class as well. And number one is always number one and will continue to be number one. And then from there, going over to the Senate was fun to be with guys like Michael. And it was a very similar situation. No one didn't have any real intention of doing. And then a little later, here I am as president, which was really rewarding and self-fulfilling, and in the sense that it was great to serve the Senate and serve the state and serve the legislature.
And we thank you, Eli. You're the only person, I believe, that has held the office of Speaker and President in our Wyoming legislature. And we thank you. I think collectively you have 26 years of service, and that doesn't count all the other things that you did. And we are grateful for your vision, or going along with Bill Schilling. I know he's on our conference today, that this is a good idea to have Leadership Wyoming. I certainly agree with that. Michael,
actually, Rose, it's been 28
go ahead.
Years, but who's counting?
How many? Is it 28?
28, yes.
Oh. Well, so then
14.
We did make the 5 decades with the 3 of you. That's amazing.
And the other thing too is working with you. I know Michael felt that way, and I think I think Dan worked too, working with you in the legislature was a real thrill for me. Working with you.
Thank you, Eli. I really appreciate that. You know, I think everyone knows this. I was pretty brief on the bios for these individuals, but you know, we all come from a very diverse background. You know, Eli's an engineer, Michael's a pilot, Dan's a rancher, and we all wear many different hats. And I think that that's what makes good decisions collectively from 90 folks. With that though, Michael, maybe you would like to add some thoughts on Leadership Wyoming and your experience.
Well, Leadership Wyoming opened up the whole state to me. I never really thought about running before. And Leadership Wyoming said, you know, you go to Rock Springs, you go to Sheridan, you go to Laramie, and you learn a little bit about each town, and you get to shadow somebody. I think, I don't know if they're doing it today, but we did back then. We'd shadow somebody for half a day, and you'd learn about the town. And it started to kind of dawn on me that I could do this. I could represent my constituents, and I could do it correctly. And so then probably in April, we graduated, late April. And by May 1st, 2nd, I was signed up to run for the Senate. And so I've been there ever since.
Thank you. How about you, Dan?
There's a very strong connection with Leadership Wyoming in my time in the legislature. So I'd been a commissioner for 8 years and lost the election of 10. So I had those 2 years of not being in office, and I used one of those years with Leadership Wyoming. And there were 3 legislators in the class. There was Senator Dockstader, who's the new Senate president, and Matt Green from Laramie, and Joe Barbuto from Rock Springs. And just as the class unfolded, I would ask those guys questions, and they were good to me and encouraging of me. And finally, the night of our graduation in Sheridan, this had been the 17th of May of 12, Joe Barbuto comes up to me with this check, and it's my registration fee to file to run for office, which I didn't use. I still have it. And as you know, Joe later became and I think still is, the state Democratic chairman, and I was Republican, but we were just friends. So that's a marvelous little story in my background. Memorial Day night, I was sitting there in my living room with my notebook, my Leadership Wyoming notebook on my desk or on my lap, thinking through, am I going to do this or not? And decided to do it. And the next day went in and signed up in the Capitol basement and had a good 8-year career out of it. So I kind of like what Michael said about the things you do, you know, the visits to the coal mine, the visit to Trona mine, the lunch where you get one of the Supreme Court justices to sit at your table, the visit to the state library, just an extraordinary group of experiences that we all shared. And I gained a lot of confidence too, just from my interactions with my 44 classmates during that year.
Well, and like we're doing right now with the class of 2021 is that we're doing a lot of learning in public. With the COVID pandemic, it's really affected how we learn and how we engage with each other. And I think that that's part of what you also came away from with Leadership Wyoming, is going into that fishbowl of 90 plus all the others. And what a lot of people forget about is that we have a staff that grows in size during those sessions, and we have all the advocates and the lobbyists and the executive branch. So we're working with a lot of people. But I guess I found from Leadership Wyoming that the relationships that we built really carried us through a session. And then during the interim, you had that opportunity of going to the different communities and being able to connect with alumni. Dan, how about if you were to, I sent this question to you guys in advance, but if you were to roast or toast 2020, what would you pick? And what are some snapshots maybe of the year for you?
Somebody said one of the bad things about the COVID was all the gyms got shut down. but that meant we had more time to stay home for baking. Then that became a problem, but then there was yoga pants to rescue us from that. So it worked out okay. Then there was a story about the guy who became so distracted that he poured in some of his hand sanitizer into his coffee and was stirring it up. But I think it's been a kind of a difficult run for us all. That my snapshots are, it was the last day of the legislature, and the schedule's kind of intermittent that day. And so Senator or Representative Paxton from Encampment and I are sitting there side by side in the assembly room, and he says, they just canceled the state tournament. And I always go back to that as being the time the switch was flipped. And it really started in Wyoming there on March 12th in the morning when the tournament got canceled. It's been an angry time in my county. My county's been one that's chafed under the restrictions. There was an anger played into the election. I remember going to the pig show, the pig wrestling at the county fair on about the 1st of August, and there was probably 500 people there. And I think we counted 2 masks. So it's just been a tumultuous time. I think back to the things my parents experienced. My dad would have been 100 tomorrow, and he died when he was 89, but tomorrow is his 100th birthday. And those experiences in the Depression and World War II were so imprinted on him, and all the sacrifices that people endured during those, what became almost 10 out of about 12 or 13 year run for the nation. And I think we could take some lessons from them about how they all pulled together and put their divisions aside and united against the common enemies there. And I hope we'll yet do that before this is through.
Good, thank you. Michael?
Well, I would say that the year definitely needs to be roasted. I kind of like to forget the sugar. I think the snapshot would be me looking totally surprised at what happened from the vote of the people, as well as this pandemic that we're living through. But as Dan said, it's been a tumultuous year.
Yeah, you know, it is 5 o'clock somewhere, and we could be using those glasses that Mandy gave us. Eli, how about you?
Well, I would agree with what Dan and Michael both said about this year. It's there's a lot of words to describe it. Tumultuous is one. I would think of just unsettling, and I'll be glad when it's over. Quite frankly, it's just been a strain on everything. The lack of civility and politics at the national level. You know, it goes on and on. The attack on fossil fuels, which I think is misguided totally. So I would definitely say it's a roast. You know, we learn from these kind of things, and particularly with the legislature, when we ended the session, and I can remember voting on the budget bill, and Chairman of Appropriations usually support the bill, but I voted no. I just didn't think we were ready to spend that kind of money. Little did I know what would happen in the next started a week or 2 later, and look where we are today. And so it's just been a tough year, but yet Wyoming is a state that's known for its resilience. And I mentioned earlier, you talk to people around the country, they look at Wyoming and say, wow, how do you do what you do? How do you have no debt? And so on and so forth. And it's just our good conservative fiscal policy. So, you know, a roast for the year, but yet, you know, a toast to the Wyoming people that work so hard to be able to at least withstand this kind of a situation we find ourselves in by the good guidance and hard work in the past to put forward a rainy day fund and a lot of things we've done, some good things. You know, Leadership Wyoming, I mentioned earlier, is one of them, but the Hathaway, and I mean, it goes on and on, the good things we've done for our state. So roast this year, let's move on to the next one, and hopefully we'll have some toast.
Thank you, Eli. I think it's important for everyone that's on our video today too to know that all 3 of these gentlemen went through challenges with health during serving the people of Wyoming. And I think that that's what's really important too, is that not only do you need to be courageous, but you need to be brave. And when you're in a legislative session or when you're serving a term, you don't always have time to take care of yourselves. And I think that that's important too. That's where your families come in. I know all of your families and how loving they've been. But I think too, what's important is that the legislature, even though we have both Republicans, independents, or libertarians, and Democrats, is that we are one big family and we do look out for each other. And I think that that's one of my fondest memories, is just that whomever it was walking into the Capitol and being surrounded by these folks, I could have had an argument with them or a debate on an issue, but the next day or the next minute, I was in cahoots with them on another piece of legislation and supporting them. And whether I just think that that's a critical thing for all of us here today to know, is that these fine men really have gone through some big struggles, and they've come out the other side, and they are still willing to serve with full hearts the people of Wyoming. And I think with that, Eli, since you're the one.
Before you leave that, Rosie, and that's such a good point. And one of the things that's helped me through this is my relationship with the Lord. But with Dan on, Dan and I have our prayer breakfast for the legislature. And Dan came up with a great idea a couple of years ago, and he put all the names of the Senate and the House in a hat, and we drew out names. And so for the rest of that session, that would be who we would think of in our prayers. So, Dan, thanks again for doing all that. And I hope there's someone to carry on for you and I as we move on. But that was one thing that got me through some of my issues with health, as well as, some of those times in the session, they're not all fun days. And so you reach down and your family's so important, but that relationship with members, it is one big family. And I'm thinking about, as I move on with my life, what am I going to be able to miss and what I will miss? And it's the people. And it'll be different for all of us. You know that, Rosie, when you left, I left once and came back. It'll be different, Michael and Dan, for us, because it'll just be different. Not that it'll be a bad different, but it will be different.
Yeah, I just found a book. It has the 12 steps to recovery of having been a legislator. and I was thinking about getting copies for all you guys, but I truthfully haven't read it yet myself. I think, Michael, maybe we'll just go with that for a minute, and before we wrap up with maybe some questions and answers.
Oh, you're asking me, Rosie, what basically the legacy is?
Yeah, about your legacy and decisions you made and what you're hoping to be remembered by and what you might be thinking about going forward.
Well, I'm hoping that I finally got to look at the big picture. That's the biggest thing that I get. The state should be better off. I would like to think it is better off since I was involved. And I'd also like to be known as the guy that tried to institute the tolling on I-80, because tolling was it would have taken care of some of our road problems today. But so those kind of issues, and the state being the single biggest issue, the state is better off since I've been there.
Good. Thank you. How about you, Dan?
Well, there's always people you bond with, and I think they carry a little bit of you with them after you're gone. We were like that with you after you were gone. There's a couple areas I worked on in the judiciary world that were very important to me. The criminal justice reform bills, where we try to invest our money in treatment rather than incarceration. I hope those will go on. There was one year in particular in 2018 when all the domestic abuse bills that came forward, and a number of them got passed. That was a very important time for that lobbying group and for the primarily the women and children of the state. I always gravitated towards the compassion bills, so I hope there's somebody who will come along and fill my role in that. And then, every year they take a class picture, and those get sprinkled around the Capitol on some obscure hallway. But I am happy to think there'll be some time when my grandkids or great grandkids will go find my picture in one of those 4 portraits and say, well, Grandpa was concerned about the state and he did something about it, and maybe they'll take some inspiration from that.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, gentlemen, for your service. You know, I finally just put up my last montage of all of our legislature activity, and it makes me just so proud to be a part of that portrait and to have served with all of you. And I know that you're all going to continue to do good things, and I'm going to have Mandy help me here if we have any questions, because I can't do it all by myself. She's so multi-talented. Eli.
Before we do that, Rosie, just, you know, I sat down one time and added up the number of votes. Maybe Michael and Dan have done that, but it's in the thousands. And certainly some of the votes, there were a lot of tough votes. And actually, I did vote wrong several times. And I remember looking back at that. But the thing that when I look back at what I've done or been involved with in the legislature, one of the things was the Capitol. And there was clearly a need there, and clearly there was a lot of anti-people. You know, about not only the way we did it, the money, but at the end of the day, it was one of the great things that we did for the state. You know, and primarily driven by it being the people's house to allow the citizens to come and have an environment where they felt comfortable to be able to testify in front of a committee, share their views, good, bad, or indifferent. And that was one of the good things. And then the really disappointment I have is as I, you know, step down here in about 6 weeks, like the other 2 gentlemen with me, is that, you know, we've kicked the can the last 3 or 4 years about our budgets. And we just really, we just rely on our savings, which we're glad we have. But in the end of the day, we really should have done something differently about either our appetite to spend or ways to generate revenues or both. And I'm one of the more conservative guys along the way, but yet I did vote for the lodging tax. I thought it was the right thing. I still don't think we can cut our way out of the situation we find ourselves in. And we need to do a combination. We need to make appropriate reductions. You saw what the governor said yesterday. He did a good job, a tough job he's got to do right now. But it's too bad that we haven't made more progress the last 3 or 4 years. So we had more of a bite of the apple. And I'm afraid the legislature will continue to do that. I hope not. But then all of a sudden they will reach the end of that proverbial cliff. And boy, then it's going to really be tough, particularly on K through 12. So that would be a disappointment that we didn't take a little bit firmer, quicker look to try to do something about our revenues and expenditures.
And what advice, Eli, would you have for the incoming legislative body to address those shortcomings?
Well, what I think you really need to do, obviously you were elected, you campaign based on your beliefs. And so you honor your beliefs because you represent that district. But in the bigger scheme of things, I think you really need to take a hard look at, well, if I'm going to have 500 million worth of cuts in the general fund and 300 or 400 million in education, what is the impact of that on our state? And am I willing to do that? And so you look at the alternatives. Well, the alternative is you spend all your savings. Well, we all know in our personal life, that's a bad decision. So I would say we don't spend our savings. I don't think that they'll be able to make all those cuts without having some very devastating impact on our state. You know, you can cut the muscle to a point, but then you start cutting the bone. So let's have a meaningful discussion during the next session about revenues. You know, I really think that has to be part of the equation. Now, I'm a guy that wants to bring responsible reductions to funding and the amount we spend, but I'm also willing to listen and have the debate on the revenue side. So I hope they do that. That would be my 2 cents worth. Look at the reductions, the way we need to do it. We spent too much money. We need to control it. But let's talk about revenues as well. We need to do both.
Well, and I think that committee needs to be taken seriously. I mean, this effort needs to go forward, and we have a lot of data already compiled to do that. So we need to take some action on that. Dan or Michael, would you like to opine on this process moving forward?
Say that, you know, we're the lowest alcohol tax, beer tax in particular. We're lowest beer tax. We're also the lowest in cigarettes, or second lowest in cigarettes, I should say. Those can raise a little bit of revenue. They won't raise a lot. You could slap $1 on a pack of cigarettes and it wouldn't raise a lot of revenue. But I think either we need something dedicated to education. K-12 is killing us. That is the biggest single, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is K-12. And that needs to be looked at for revenue, because constitutionally we have to provide that. And I'm glad to provide it. And I'm glad the Constitution does say that. But we need to look at some kind of revenue dedicated to K-12. And that's what I would say to the legislature.
Dan, how about you?
I'm concerned for all those programs that are what I call the Fram oil filter programs that we have had and still have, but the ones like criminal justice reform, where if you can spend $10,000 a year on a treatment program and keep somebody out of prison in Rollins for $44,000 a year, you've helped that person and the state immensely. And early childhood education and the impact it has on giving kids a running start once they enter school is like that. There are some other certain types of mental health programs and prevention programs that if you don't have them, then on down the road, you're into big expense and a lot of human misery in addition. So I'm concerned that those programs will be some of the ones that have to go, but it will be unfortunate. I hope there'll be some champions rise up for some of that stuff.
And what do you think? I'm sorry to interrupt, but what do you think your thoughts are on that? Because those issues are not red or blue. And how does the incoming legislative body look at this? That these are services that benefit a community and their friend and neighbor.
They do. I sat in on one of the Wyoming Taxpayer Association panels last week with legislators on it, and they noted that like 2/3 of the money that is taken in by the state goes back into the communities. I mean, it's your school teachers, it's your construction projects, it's your, there's all kinds of things, local government spending. So it's not just feeding the elephant of what's going on in Cheyenne, but it's going out to all 23 counties and 98 communities, and people are benefiting whether they realize it or not as they pay their little share. So I don't know how you move forward without some sort of tax raising measures. And what I was advocating over the summer was, you know, little things in a variety of areas as opposed to one big giant tax of some kind that would be terribly burdensome on some aspect of the state.
Yeah, this is a big lift that the governor has proposed. You know, when I think back on working on the budget, you know, to have reduced in less than 2 years, $1 billion off the general fund is substantial, and it does impact all 23 counties.
You know, one of the things too, when you look at the money we spend, Rosie, and you'll remember this, I think when I was last in the House, our budget general fund was about 1.2 billion. That escalated to about 3.6 billion a couple of governors ago, and Governor Meade and Governor Gordon have had to reduce that. Now we're down to 2.6 billion. So we've had to make a lot of those reductions were probably warranted and necessary, but it's painful. Once you spend the money, you develop the constituency out there that's used to that money being there. As you well know, all of you know, it's hard to then say no. So we've kind of dug ourselves in our own hole. Now we've got to dig our way out of it. And one of the things that just bugs me is, and I've never done it, I don't know if Michael or Dan have, but sign these pledges and these commitments before you get to the legislature. And I just never did that. I said, I'm elected to go down there and use common sense to do what's right, given the time and the nature of what we're dealing with. And yet people make these commitments early on, like no new taxes, or I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that. They have no idea what they're getting into. Use common sense for those that decided to send them to Cheyenne. So I think that's a shortcoming on their the way they handle themselves and what they do when they get to the session.
And they don't know anything about going to session. They don't know how the feel of the state will be. And elaborating on what Dan said, government can be looked as an industry too. Government does pay your teachers. Government does pay your police officer, whether local or statewide. And so when those people are gone, and we will have to eventually cut those people out of their employment. In fact, the governor is now proposing to cut those. That kind of money will be gone. And so you won't ever get it back.
And that's one of the concerns I have, is about efficiency or effectiveness or response time to the current issues that are on the table. How does the executive branch, who's a constant, respond to these needs?
We worked really hard on efficiency a couple of years ago, and Senator Perkins carried that bill. And we've had millions of dollars that we see in savings right now, Rosie, that I think, has helped us a lot. But yet, we still have $500 million out there that we're having to reduce. And Dan's right, it really affects the entire state. The tough part I have is, it's just not, it's a matter of fairness. Michael mentioned K through 12 with 800-pound gorilla. It is, and the way it's set up now with the constitutional requirements, you have a situation where there are automatic step increases and raises. So you look at the amount of money going to the school district, they've had an increase of 5 or 6% in the current school year they're in, yet state government is now being cut 15%, including our university and including what I think is one of the most important things in our state, the community colleges. So where's the fairness? And that's one of the things the next legislative session is going to have to sort out. Well, that's a tough one too, but they're going to have to deal with it. I'm on recal, and we're going to come up with some ideas. We'll see what happens.
I just want to give you a big thank you. And I get all teared up thinking about you not being there to represent me, but thank you for your service. And as former Speaker Colin Simpson said to me, life goes on after the legislature. So thank you. Thank you for all being today here to participate and observe and supporting us through this journey.